So it's week 6. Just before we get started with today's lesson, just want to chat a little bit about next week's class, where I assume there will be a whole lot more people in the room, because next week is your midterm test. So there's two parts. It's worth 20% of your grade, so you're going to want to be here on time so you have the full class to get your work done. There's 2 parts. There's 30 questions of multiple choice, and there's a big pool of questions, so you'll get random questions. So you and the person next to you, you'll get some of the same questions. You won't get all the same questions, and you're going to get them in a different order. Okay. And then there's also, so that's worth 10% of your grade. And then there is a practical section that's also worth 10% of your grade, where you're going to have to build something with Node and Express and possibly MongoDB. Okay. The exam's open book, so you are allowed to use Blackboard. You are allowed to use any work you've done in the class, any notes you bring, the slides that are on Blackboard. The one thing that you're not allowed to do, and I've had to deal with this in the past, you're not allowed to, I'm probably going to make my Git repositories private for next week, because last year when my repositories were open, I had students who literally just took my Git repositories and changed the words and then gave them back to me for their test. And I even told the class before the test, I have put extra things in my code on GitHub that will tell me if you take my repositories. So you can look at them, but don't download them and change the words, because I know where to look to find that these are my files. And sure enough, 2 students ignored me, and they did that, and I found these things that I put in my code that no one in the class knew were there, and they both got zeros on their exam, and they got academic misconduct charges. And they both admitted to doing this because it was obvious they took my code, because there was stuff I'd put in there that I didn't do in class that they didn't know where to find. Right? So what I will probably do is just make the repositories private, or I may do the same thing, put some indicators in there so that I know if you've taken my code. Okay, so that's not the idea of the test. You also can't use Google. I'm not interested in seeing what you can find on Google in 3 hours, and you can't watch the videos. Believe it or not, I've actually had students try and watch the lessons in the middle of a test. That's kind of not the idea either. I'm testing what it is you already know. Okay. Also, if you have any thoughts of, well, I know somebody in second year in another semester who's already taken this course, and they probably can give me their files for the test. I change the test every semester, so that really isn't going to help you. Okay, I'm not going to give you the same test I gave somebody else in the past.
Did you have a quiz last week?
No, we didn't have a quiz last week. We had a quiz just in week 4.
Is today a review?
Sorry?
Is today a review?
Today is not a review.
Okay. You're teaching something new.
Yes. Okay. So what we want to do is take the little bookstore that we've been building so far. Last week we got it connected up to our database so we could read the list of books. We populated the database. This week we want to build out being able to add, edit, and delete books and get all that done and working by the end of class this week. Okay. So for starters, what we want to do, so I'm going to take my lesson 5 folder, copy it to lesson 6. So let's start with that. And then I've also created a bunch of views for you, new views that are on GitHub that you're going to want to download and add to lesson 6, but I'll show you how to do that. So grab lesson 5 and copy it. And rename it to lesson 6. If your application, if you're using your local instance of MongoDB, then we need to also start up the MongoDB server. If your code is connecting to MLab, we don't need to do that, because you'll just use your MLab database, which is up and running in the cloud already. So I will run my local MongoDB. I'm probably not going to use it, but I'll just walk through the process for anybody who wants to use their local instance of Mongo instead of MLab. We can do that as this copy. So while this copies, I'll open up a command prompt. And I'll go into the MongoDB folder we made last week. Again, if you're using MLab, you can skip this. So inside our MongoDB folder, we copied all the MongoDB program files that we downloaded last week, and we can start our server with the command mongod -- db path. We created a folder called data last week, so we have to specify a path to that data folder. So when I hit enter, this should start my local MongoDB server. It'll give us a whole kind of stack trace, and at the bottom it should tell us MongoDB is running on port 27017, and it's listening, waiting for connections. So again, the command is mongod, which is the Mongo daemon. So I run that, and it tells me that it's waiting for connection. So I have my local server running. I'm not going to use this server. I'm going to use the live one on MLab instead. But if you want to work locally, all you need to do is run this command and just leave this command window, just minimize it. And when we're done at the end of class, you can just shut the command window. It'll turn your server off. We don't need to do anything else with it. I think my lesson 5 folder is finally copied. So I'm just going to rename that one to lesson 6. I'll open up lesson 6 now in WebStorm, and then I'm going to show you guys where a couple of I created 4 new views just to save time. It's all HTML, so I'll save us all the HTML typing. I've put those up on GitHub. I'll show everyone where to get them, and you can download them and add those views into our lesson 6. So go ahead and open up your lesson 6 folder once your lesson 5 is done copying. Of course, if you don't have a completed lesson 5, you can grab my files from GitHub. Got to run my copy again because I was in the wrong folder. Please keep in mind, if you take my files off of GitHub, they're going to have my database connection credentials, so you're going to have to modify them for your own.
What's your GitHub ID?
IFOTN. The link is on Blackboard inside of Tools and Resources. So if you have your lesson 6 set up, if you go to my GitHub page, you'll see a repository there. And if you don't know how to get to my GitHub page, by now everybody should know it's in Weekly Learning and Tools and Resources. It'll be right here. So you can always get anything we do in class here. So there's a repository called COMP2068 Lesson 6 New Views. So I've created 4 EJS files, a 404 page, an error page, an add, and an edit. So if you download these 4 files, I'll show you where they go. So go ahead and download that repository. Or you can open it up. Now you can leave out, don't worry about the Git files. You'll see 4 EJS views. For the moment, just put them all inside lesson 6 in views, but then we're going to move add and edit inside of our book subfolder. So over here on my left, I've got my lesson 6 project. Here on the right, these are the 4 files. So just put these 4 EJS files, put them into views. But then go into views and we want to move add and edit into books. So books now has add, edit, and index. And our main views also, we now have 404 and error in here as well. So there's no JavaScript, there's no node code in these at all. Add and edit are just 2 copies of an HTML form for adding and editing books. The error and 404 pages, those are just static pages with the header and footer. Scott? Sorry? Add and edit. So inside of books, this is what your directory should look like now. The index page view we made last week, actually made 2 weeks ago. And then the add and the edit view that we just grabbed from GitHub. We won't need any other views inside of books. With these 3 views, we'll be able to do all the CRUD operations. We don't actually need any other pages in here for doing saving and deleting. We'll do it all just with these 3 views. So now that I've grabbed those 4 views and put them in lesson 6, I'll open up the project in my code editor. We can have a look at what's in those EJSs. I'll just kind of close everything up here. So if I open up views, 404 and error are basically the same. I just embedded the header and footer and put on a message in each one. And then in books, add and edit. At the moment, they're exact copies. So it's just an HTML form that has our inputs for the books. There's no JavaScript. There's no server-side code at all. Just a form styled with Bootstrap with our header footer. So I just wanted to add these so to save us time, save you guys all the trouble of typing them up. Now I need to go into my config and globals because I think I took my password out last week, so I didn't put my password on GitHub. I'm going to stay connected to MLab, so I need to put in my password. So you should have your own MLab credentials, or if you're not using MLab, then you'll use this as your connection string and connect to your local instance of MongoDB, which is running in your command prompt. So use either version of the database, whichever one you want. And I advised you last week when we set up our MLab that we should put our credentials in a file. You probably have yours already in here. I better go and check my password in that file because I don't remember what password I created a week ago, but I do have it here. Yeah, it is something like that. Whoops. So because I put it in my file, so I've put my password back in my globals. So I don't really need my local database because I'm not going to use it. I'll leave it running anyway, but I don't need it. So now I'll open a new command prompt, go into lesson 6. And I should be able to use NodeMon to get our lesson 6 application up and running. So far, so good. So we kind of built these static views a few weeks ago, but this is what we built last week, right? We seeded our MongoDB last week, and we built our books index view that runs a find query, uses Mongoose, and pulls the books out of MongoDB. So what we want to do with this today, first is we want to add a new book link that will load our add.ejs form. Then we're going to need to write the code to process a save when someone fills out that form, clicks the submit button. Then we're going to add edit and delete buttons. We'll add the delete functionality second because delete's quite simple. And we'll add the edit update functionality where we use that edit.ejs. We'll add that last. And we should be able to get all this working today. I don't see any reason why we can't. So our first step is we'll want to modify the books index view. We want to add a little link here that says add a new book. And then we're going to have to modify our books route to load the add form when a user clicks that link. Right? We got to provide an instruction. Otherwise, we'll have a cannot get error. So I'll just close up this for now. So I'm going to open up in views. Let's open up books and index right here. So you may have to expand your books folder. So here was our HTML and JavaScript table. So between our books heading and our table, we want this link to go to book/add. Just a simple HTML link. So then we're going to need to map a get handler in our root for any requests at book/add. We'll have to tell the server what view is supposed to load. So we'll add that on here. We'll save that. Then jump back in your browser, refresh your books page, click our add a book link, and let's see what happens. So what happens on yours? What do you get? Yeah, so now, so notice we didn't code. How come this page? So this was one of the pages I gave you on GitHub, right? We didn't build this one. But we get this friendly 404 page. Where's this coming from? How does it know to load this page? We never wrote any code to load our 404 view. How did this happen automatically? See? Well, Bootstrap is just for CSS. Bootstrap doesn't control any of the logic. It is where, when we did the initial Express setup, where in our application would it point to the 404 page? Yeah. Here, let's just look. We can, right? We can find in app.js, right? It actually is built to look for a page with 404. And also, if we get other errors, it'll look for a view called error, which is the other one we created. So it automatically is set to look for a view called 404. Okay, so let's fix this 404 error. We have a link here, but it goes to a page that doesn't exist. Well, the page exists, but our Express routing doesn't know how to interpret that URL. It doesn't know what to do with book/add. So where should we go so that we can get this URL to load that add.ejs form we just downloaded. Right. So inside of our books route file in books.js, we've got a get handler here at the root. So now we need a new get handler. So in this case, we want to show the form that we downloaded. So when we get a request at /add, /books is already set in app.js. So we're already inside of /books because that's configured globally in app.js. And then we'll write our callback function, close our brackets. So how are we going to display that page? And which page exactly do we want to display? So what command do we need?
You need to render EJF file.
Yeah, you got it. So res.render, and what should go in here?
Page name.
Okay, so our view is called add. Let's try that. We want to render the view called add. We don't need the extension because we've already set app.js. All the views are EJS files. So let's go back and try it. Why'd we get 404 still? You're close. It's not add/index. So what should the path be? Yeah, remember, it looks for views in the views folder. Where is the add file? It's inside of the book subfolder. So if we don't specify any path to the view, the generator assumes the path is that file's right directly in our views folder. Whereas this is not, it's inside of books. So we need to prefix it with that subfolder path. That should fix our problem. If we now try that add link again, it should load the form that I pre-built for you guys. Books.
I think it should be more. It should be before just slash.
Well, let's think about it. Books index rendered this way.
It's allowed to get this get slash first, not add first.
Sorry, I'm not understanding your suggestion.
Yeah, because there's the first getter before add, so that's gonna be called first, I guess.
Well, if that was called first, though, it would be loading the index view. It would just stay on the books page. The problem is actually here. It's loading add. The problem is the path I put to the partials is wrong. On index, notice we have ... to get out of the books folder and into partials. I missed that here. Both on the header and the footer. So what's not found are the partials. We'll probably, I think that should fix our problem. So I added ... in front of our path to both header and footer. So that was the problem. So when we should probably open up books edit because those files are copies. So I made the same mistake in both of them. So inside of edit, again, we've got to go out of books before we can go into partials. Okay, so we need the ... in front of those 4 include paths. So now we get our form. I've added some validation rules in HTML5. Oops, and I think I left in 2 fields for title. So we better wipe one of those out too. Well, you know what? Let's check our book model and see. So if I go to models, and book. Note, we have title, author, pricing year. We only have 4 fields. So I guess we'll need to make one more change. So much for me making this easy for you by creating the forms. So in add, this 3rd div here that says title again, we can remove that one. We don't need that one. It shouldn't be there. Same on edit. We'll take it out of both. There, that's better. So I made it so price can't be less than 1 cent and year can't be less. We're not selling any books older than 1600.
Well,
Okay. So we can load our form. But now if we fill it out, what'll happen? What happens now when we try and submit this?
Nothing.
It knows what to do. Notice the URL. Why did our URL stay the same? The URL is still books/add. Sorry? Right. So we're doing a post. If we look at the form, we didn't specify any action. We're not sending this to another page. It's posting to itself. Yeah, so unless you specify an action, specify a different page, HTML forms will always post to themselves or submit to themselves, which is fine. But in our controller knows what to do with a GET request at that URL, but there's no instruction what to do with a POST request. So GET will display the form, but now we need a router.post @/add so we can process that form submission and save that document to MongoDB. So let's add a post. So this time we're going to use, instead of router.get, we're going to use router.post. So it's the same URL, but a different HTTP method. We're not loading the form, we're processing the form values that the user entered and submitted by clicking the Save button. So we've got this Mongoose model that we created, book. So we're in effect going to instantiate a new instance of this class, and we want to populate the properties from our form values. And then we're going to call Mongoose has a create method. So it'll take that object and create it in MongoDB. So that's what we want to do here. So we've already got up here, right? We already have an instance of the book class. We're instantiating an instance of the book class up here. We used it on our index page and called the find method to run the query and get all the documents in that collection. So this time we're going to call book.create. And we can fill the individual properties. So this request.body.title, that would be the equivalent in PHP of $post title. So this is the input field in our request form with the name of title, which we can see right here. So typically we'll match up the input names with the field names in the database. So if we called it title here, it's got to be title there. So now we'll fill all four of the properties: the title, the author, the price, and the year the same way. Oops. And actually, after we call book.create, we're going to kind of chain two methods together. So we're going to call create. So this will grab the form inputs and try to use Mongoose to save that new document to MongoDB. And this will take a callback, because one of two things is going to happen. Either it will error out, and the error is our first parameter, or the other thing is we'll get back a new book object that will also include an ID. So if save runs, we're going to get a book object that will have the same four values we inputted plus an ID that MongoDB gives us. If it fails, we'll get an error instead. An error is always going to be that first parameter. We saw this here when we did our query. We called find, and our first parameter, we either got back an error or we got back a list of data, one or the other. If we have an error, what should we do? I suggest maybe we'll do two things. Okay, so we could log it maybe to the console. And in this case, we could load the error.ejs file that we downloaded in my starter template. And then we could otherwise, we can use redirect to /books. So go back to /books, which will then call the GET request. Now, why would we redirect? Why wouldn't we call res.render book/index? Because we want that page to load. Why are we going to redirect there instead? Right, because if we just render the view without querying the data, we don't have an updated list of data to show. By calling res.redirect, this now calls get which requeries the database before it displays the view. So we want to do a redirect rather than just loading the view directly. Otherwise, our view is not going to have any data in it.
So it's kind of calling the control, right?
Yeah, so one controller method is calling another controller method, in effect. And the second controller method then loads the view. So let's give this a try, see if we can add a new book, and if we will get redirected to our books page, and if so, whether that new book shows up. Did it actually get saved? So we'll go to books. We'll add a new book. What am I reading right now? Let's start at this one. You can add any book you want. I'll just get the details of this one. Have to find a price and a year. So $13.99, and the year is here nowhere. 2015. Let's try and save it. Hopefully this will run our post and then call get, which will take us back to our index view. Cool. So our create creates the new document in MongoDB and brings us back here. So again, here is our whole post function. So we're both, in this method, it's sort of a shortcut. If this was PHP, first we would be populating our object with all of our form inputs, and then we would be connecting to the database and filling parameters and calling execute and setting up an SQL string. Here we can do all of that in like 5 lines. So grab the inputs, send them to Mongoose, and let Mongoose try and create that document all in one shot. So much less code, because Mongoose is kind of doing a lot of the lifting for us. Our code is much lighter, and we don't have these curly, crazy dollar signs and underscores and brackets and single quotes, which make our syntax really really susceptible to typos. These things are case sensitive though. So let's say I do this. You know, my title on my form, that value's all lowercase. Now WebStorm's giving me a clue here, right? It was purple and bold when it was lowercase. It's now black, and it actually tells me it's unresolved. But if I try and put in a new book now, well, let's see what happens. This may save, but if so, my title is probably going to be empty. I have a feeling it's going to error out because that variable, that object doesn't exist, title with a capital T. We'll see. Yeah, so it errors out because that object doesn't exist. There's no value there, so it throws an error. So we can also see that our error handling is working, right? It took us to our error page. And if we check the console, here's what happened, right? So the problem is that our book validation fails. So we can see how our model works, right? We said that this field is required. We didn't provide a value, so Mongoose won't run the create operation if any of those validation rules are broken. So this is actually our Mongoose model that's throwing this error. telling us here. So we've got a validation error, it won't save. The WebStorm is particularly useful because it recognizes any objects or variables that are valid by color coding them in purple and bolding the font. So if you don't see that on something, that's a hint to you, you're using the wrong name. And it's going to fail at runtime. Does anybody have any questions about doing our post and how Create is working? No questions before we move on to delete? That sigh sounded like a question. Well, if we want delete on our books index, we want to add a column here, and we'll want to put, yep, question?
Yeah, actually.
You caught me just in time.
I have the error.
Okay.
So we cannot set the header after they are sent. So what if, I don't know, I just followed the instruction, but I got the error.
Headers already sent.
Error, yeah. Can't set headers after they are sent.
So it's not liking the redirect. It's saying it's already sent the header. Is your code exactly like mine, or is there anything different about it?
Save. Yeah, exactly save. Oh, I'm sorry.
What was
I think
different?
I'm sorry. I just copy and paste and I did not delete the below render.
Ah, so yeah, so you can't call redirect and then call render.
Yeah, right.
Because then it's trying to redirect to one URL and loading a different view at the same time.
That's right.
Okay. Trying to.
I need to play more.
So we want delete buttons here. We'll use Bootstrap to generate red buttons, which probably makes sense. Okay. So let's open up our books index. Well, we still got index open. So actually, let's put on both edit and delete buttons, but we'll add the code to make delete work first. We'll leave edit for last. So in our heading, we can put on, we'll just put on one more heading and we'll call it actions. We can put both the edit and delete buttons beside each other in one column. If you want to have an edit column and a separate delete column, that's fine. I'm just going to put them together in one column. Oops, and that should, I didn't close my tag. So now after our year, let's put in another TD, and we'll put two buttons in here. One that says edit, one that says delete. So there's our first button. Actually, wait, we won't use a button. We'll use an A tag. We'll give this one a class of BTN. I think BTN info. That'll make it kind of a light blue color, the edit buttons. And then beside it, we'll put on a red button. So for the moment, they'll just go to /books. We're going to have to modify this, but let's just get the button showing up here. And if we want red buttons, we can use BTN danger. If we reload now, we should get a fifth column with a light blue edit button and a red delete button beside each book. Something like that. So right now, they both just go to /books, which is our books index view. So on our delete, what should our URL look like? Where should those red buttons, what should that path look like? So we'll do book/delete. And what else do we need to do with the link? Close, friendlier than a query string. Sorry? Yeah, so which data, so what should get appended onto the end?
ID.
Okay, so we can use books I, books, so the current book in the array, dot underscore ID. That's the name of the primary key field that MongoDB generates. Underscore ID in lowercase, right? Because we're still inside our loop. Our for loop goes all the way from here to here. So just like we have access to the title, author, price, and year, we also have access to the ID property that MongoDB generates for each book. So we want to append that onto the end of that URL. That's where we want to go. Book/delete/ABC123. It will be a 24-character string each time. That's what MongoDB generates. So now you can see in the status bar on the bottom left of my browser, you can see those IDs. So if I click now, we get our 404 page or our error because we've got no get handler here, right? We're trying to run a get request, but our controller doesn't know how to interpret. All it knows is get / get add or post add. We've only set up those 3 routes. So now we need another get handler for this one. And then doing the delete with Mongoose, well, that's going to be pretty simple. If we have book.create, what do you suppose the Mongoose method is going to be? We're going to call. Somebody who said remove. That's right. So we'll call book.remove and we'll just pass in the ID that's part of the URL. Mongoose will delete it. And then we'll do this same thing. We'll check for an error and we'll either display the error page or we'll take the user back and refresh the book's view. So our code will be like add, but even simpler because we won't need this part. We just have to pass in the ID value instead. So we don't actually even need a physical page for doing delete. We don't have to create a delete view because the user doesn't need to see anything. We can just grab that URL, say, oh, the user wants to delete this book with this ID. We'll delete it, and then we'll just refresh this current page. We don't have to have a view. That's why there is no, I didn't create a delete.ejs, and we're not going to create one. It's not necessary. So we'll do a get /book/delete ID. So here's how we indicate in here that part of our URL is going to be a parameter. If we prefix that with a colon, that tells Express that this value is the name of a parameter. If you were to do more than one, then it would have to be, it'd be something like that. So the colon indicates each one of those values is a parameter. So for example, we might have this because it could be something like this. right? We may want something like this, right? So both of those are going to be variables, right? So same URL path, we want to run the same thing, but we're going to query both based on category and product. So it could look like that. Good question. So there's our route, then our regular express callback. See, by now writing function request response next in your routers, this should be relatively familiar because you did it. We've been doing it in class. You did it in your lab when you did your labs about is get the ID parameter from the end of the URL. So let's just create a variable called _ID. Now we used, in our crate, we used request.body to get values from a form. When we've got parameters in the URL, if we were using PHP, what would we use to get those parameter values? Yeah, we'd use get, right? Get would allow us to take from the query string any parameter values. In Node, the syntax is better. Instead of $_get, it's request.params, and then the name of the parameter. Again, if we go back to our shopping cart, you might have two variables, right? Request.params.category, request.params.product. So the syntax is a lot cleaner. Makes and just more, it's more clear. So we'll create a local variable called ID. And now we should be able to use Mongoose book.remove. So we just need to pass in. So we're telling Mongoose, this is like our where clause. Our ID in MongoDB is equal to the ID that's in our URL that we've put into. So this line is optional. We could just put request.params ID right here. It's really not necessary to store it in a local variable first. And then our callback. And in here, all we'll check for is an error. We don't need to get any document back. We're getting rid of this document. So we're either going to get back an error or we get nothing. So now we can just do our check. If we have an error, log it. Load our error page and stop. What should we do if we have no error?
Then it's
Yeah, let's so where do we want to go? Yeah, redirect to what URL? Yeah, just /books. So we never actually leave the books view, right? The delete button lives on our index. And when we click delete, we'll try to remove it from the database and we're just refreshing that same view. There is no delete view at all here. It all happens on the server. So I'm going to add, maybe I'll add another couple of test books because I want to delete them. I like the data I have in there, so I'll add a few more before I try doing delete. So I'll go back to books. So I'll add one more. So we can try and do a delete here. We'll see if we did it correctly. So I'll go and try and get rid of this one. Okay. Let's check our console. That's interesting. We actually got a 404 here. /book/delete. Why did we get a 404? So our code never actually ran. Take a look at line 36 and line 54. Why did we get a 404 down here? I made a very common mistake. Yeah, so remember books, we're already inside of books. So our URL is wrong. So this should just be /delete, right? We're already inside of books. So our path, just like our path with add doesn't include the word books, our path to delete shouldn't include the word books. So now if I try it again, right, it just does a quick reload, no other page loads. Now there are a couple of issues with it. I'll put the code back up. There are a couple of other things we should be doing with this. What are the two? Can anybody see any problem with what we've done so far? There's nothing wrong with what we've done. It works. It's just kind of incomplete, really. What other things should we be doing in addition to what's going on here? Rachel, what do you think?
Add a model if they want to confirm the release.
Right. Okay. Number one, we should never ever let people delete data without asking them to confirm it first. Okay. What happens? What do you do? And I had it happen recently where a customer of mine accidentally deleted a whole bunch of data out of their database. What happens? What do you have to do when that happens? Well, you can't. Part of the problem is you can't always remake it because maybe your users added the data, right? So you can add, but how do you? What happens to that data? Do you have any way to get it back if you accidentally delete stuff? Sorry? Okay, you're on the right track. So how would you do that? Okay. Most, here's one hosting plan I'm used. So most hosting plans will back up your databases nightly. So here are a bunch of databases, different databases that I manage, like this one. So they take and store backups. So I've got backups for like the last 2 weeks, as well as a couple backups from last month. So if my client accidentally deletes a bunch of data here, now, one option is I could just restore from last night's backup. The problem, what's the potential problem if I go and click on restore from one of these, Scott? Right, anything that's come in since last night's backup, I've now deleted. So more likely what I have to do is download it onto a local copy of my database, open it up, and then go and find the missing data and copy or import it back into the live one. So this takes time, particularly if it's a lot of data that's been removed and it's stored in different places in the database. It's a lot of work to go and do. So it's a pain, which is why whenever we're creating applications that let people delete data, we have to be really clear that they need to make sure they delete the right thing, right? Especially when they're on these. Anybody else have kind of chubby thumbs like me, right? Like we call it, developers call it, you know, fat finger syndrome, where we accidentally tap the wrong thing. Well, if that wrong thing is a delete button, that's a real problem. You know, how frustrating is that for users if they're constantly deleting things they didn't mean to delete, right? Endlessly frustrating. That's actually why many websites, they never actually delete your data. When you click delete, it disappears, but what are they doing with it instead of deleting it? Facebook is famous for this. Yeah, they archive it. They have a status field saying active or inactive. So when you click delete, they don't actually remove it. They just make that post or that picture, they make it inactive so it doesn't show up. So it looks to you like it's gone, but it's really not gone. And Facebook is legendary that they, you know, it's almost impossible to actually truly remove your data from their servers. And the problem is everything's backed up. So even if they delete it from today, well, they still have probably thousands of backups that have all the old data, which is why you should be very careful about what you post on those things if you don't want that stuff to ever be seen by anybody. So we do need to be careful. We do need a delete confirmation. There are several ways to do it. I think the easiest way is just to add a little bit of, we can create a little jQuery script. We've already got jQuery in here, right? We downloaded it last week because inside of public and JavaScript, right? Bootstrap JavaScript uses jQuery for some of the Bootstrap CSS effects. So we already have jQuery here. So we can use jQuery to pop up a little modal window that says, are you sure you want to delete this? And it'll generate an OK and a cancel button. The OK button returns true and the cancel returns false. That's built right into JavaScript. So we can just call that function and then interpret if they click true or false. If they click cancel, delete doesn't happen in case they got a fat thumb. They click OK, we know they really want to delete that book, and then we'll go ahead and complete that. So our index view, it's already set up to use jQuery, which is great, right? If we view our source, here's our link to jQuery right here. Cool. So we can write a little sample, a little script that uses jQuery and then attach that script onto our delete links. We're not going to modify this file. We're just going to use it. No. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. Inside of JavaScript, let's create our own little JS file. We have to write 3 lines of JavaScript and then just attach the file. This won't take us long, and then we'll take a break for lunch. Okay. So create a new JavaScript file. Again, I'm in, if you look on the left, public and JavaScript. So the same place we have our jQuery file. We'll create a new JavaScript file. I'll maybe just call it client scripts. Meaning this is not back-end node JavaScript. This is front-end JS code for working in the browser. So call it client scripts.js. You want to call it something else, that's fine. The name is not really important. So what we're going to do is use jQuery for a delete confirmation box. So what we're going to do is we're going to attach a class onto all of those delete buttons, and then we'll write a little script that says whenever any HTML element with this class is clicked, show the pop-up window. So we'll create a class called confirmation, and we'll attach this class onto our delete buttons. Not the edit buttons, only the red buttons. So when we get a click event for any elements with the class of confirmation, we're going to run a callback. Whoops, I think it's, sorry, yes, I missed that bracket. So JavaScript, front-end JavaScript has a method called confirm. So this method returns a true or false. It automatically generates a little modal window with an OK and a cancel button, and whatever message we pass in as a parameter to that method, that's what will appear in our pop-up. So cancel returns false, which means our link is dead. Doesn't continue. OK returns true, so our href tag carries on. So here's our script. Now, it's not connected to anything right now. If I go and click the delete button, there's no confirmation box. This is not yet connected to our page, and it's not connected to our delete button. So we need to first link this script to our index view down at the bottom, and then we need to attach this class onto our red buttons. And then this script should run anytime a user clicks one of those red buttons. So we'll try this out. We basically have to add, just modify 2 lines in our view, and this should work. And then we'll take a pause. So let's go back to index.ejs. Now, if we want, we could actually put that in our footer, and then that script is available. If we make other views with delete buttons, we can use that same script, right? It would run for anything. So we can either link to it here, or we can put it right in the footer. I'm going to put it in the footer, so we could use it potentially if we have delete buttons anywhere else. So open up partials and footer. Where in this file should we link to that? What line number would it make sense to put it in?
Before body tag.
So before the body tag, okay, yep, it would work there. Where can we not put it? Right, we can't put it above line 8 because our script uses jQuery, so jQuery has to be linked first, or our script won't run because it depends on jQuery. So it can go before or after Bootstrap, but it has to go after jQuery. So now any page that uses our footer can use that confirmation. So just add that reference in, but it's still not going to work. If you go and click your delete button now, you're still not going to get a confirmation. So now we'll go back to our index.ejs. So what do I need to do with this tag to connect it up to use that script?
Add a confirmation class.
Right, we already have a class attribute. So after my Bootstrap class, which gives it the actual visual style, we'll add in a space, and we'll also add confirmation as an additional class. So these classes we're using for CSS, for layout and styling. This class we're using to attach that little JavaScript. I'll show you in a second when I take it out what happens, then it will be more clear.
What I was actually thinking was that if you're thinking that has to do text styling, then maybe Bootstrap should be on the bottom. Bootstrap has a tendency to mess up in the CSS.
We could, you know what? That's not a bad point. So there's a possibility that Bootstrap has its own class called confirmation, and if Bootstrap is first, that class is going to take precedence over this one. So that's a really good point you make. Thank you, Tiffany. I think we should put that one before Bootstrap. Well, let's try that now. So now when I refresh and click delete, right, by giving those buttons a class of confirmation, linking in our script file, it will now, so when I click cancel, nothing happens. When I click delete and click OK, it runs. But it's vital, this value here, so without this class definition, this value in blue, it has to match exactly that value in blue. That's what links them together. Sorry?
Was there any way to get rid of the implementation?
Oh, yeah, I just had to check that box. I didn't check it.
No, but like, is there a way-
No, it's built into the browser. It's built in the browser. So if this is confirmation this way, if I put this in as, you know, like confirm delete, like if I gave it a different class, now my pop-up isn't going to run anymore because these links are no longer connected to this script. So if I do it this way, it's not connected anymore. So that class name in my JS file, it's got to match exactly the class name in my. We're using a class, but we're not using it for CSS purposes. We're using it so we can manipulate that element in JavaScript. So any element I give confirmation to, let's say I put on something else. I'll just put on another button. Don't do this. This is just for demonstration. Okay. So I put on a button. It's not an A tag, it's a button, but I give it a class of confirmation. And it's attached, that JavaScript is attached as well to that element. Any HTML element we give a class of confirmation to, when it's clicked, we'll run this script. Now, clicking OK won't do anything. So our little script here that we've used, it's nice and portable, right? If we add other things like products or users or anything else, and we wanted to be able to delete those, all we have to do is give those delete buttons a confirmation class. Or on our edit view, I've put a save button here, but we could also put a delete button on this page. When you're editing, you could say, now I'm going to delete it. And if we add a confirmation, we'll get the JavaScript. So in assignment 2, one of the things you'll need to do is do CRUD operations. So you can just use this script. You can take this, you don't have to change it. You can take it straight off of GitHub or right here and reuse it. You don't have to change it. I don't consider it cheating or copying. Okay, there's really not much else to do here. It's nice and generic. It does exactly what we need it to do. So you are free to use this open license on this script file, okay? I've just open sourced it for you. So delete is done. We've got a confirmation. There is one other thing we should do. I'm just going to show you how to break this, but we'll fix it after we take a break. One potential problem, I'll just copy that link for a minute. But what happens if I take that ID and try to modify it? So let me remove it. Now I've got an error. Because Mongoose expects, you'll notice those ID values as I mouse over them. What do you notice about the length of those values that get generated? If you look in the status bar. So they are hex, yep. What about the length? It's actually not varying. They're the same. So it's 24. So if we pass in to Mongoose any ID value that's not 24 characters, it'll crash. So what we should be doing, because we're going to need to pass that ID on our edit page as well, so we can look that up, we probably should add a check here before we try and run the remove. We should check that we've got the proper size and format of the ID. Otherwise, remove will crash.
How do you check that it's in the data set? Just proper format?
What we want to check, you know what? I hadn't actually thought to do this before, to be honest with you. I have to give credit to Tom because Tom was teaching a similar lesson at another college on Saturday, and the student said, well, what happens if I change the ID? And then they spent an hour trying to figure out how to handle it. And Tom said to me Monday, I got to show you this little trick because one of your students may ask you, you know, you're going to show them how to do it properly, but what if someone asks you how to monkey with that ID? How do we deal with it? So Tom showed me what we need to do. So we're going to implement that into our delete here because we're going to need that for the edit as well. In case someone tries to edit, but tries to manipulate that ID number, we don't want it to crash. We probably want it to handle it. I mean, I guess this is okay. On the other hand, we could say, nah, this is fine, right? Well, if we do this, no big deal. It's going to our error page, which is okay. But we will add a check to it just to make sure that we have a proper value before we bother trying to remove something. So we'll add that after we have lunch, and then we come back. We'll add that ID to the edit links. Our edit view is done. Well, it's mostly done, except we're going to have to populate our text boxes, right? When we click edit, we don't want to give the user a blank page. We want to give them a page that's filled out with all the values. And then we'll have to process an update when we post that page. And we should be able to get all that done before we go today. So I'm going to stop the video stream. It's 20 after, so let's take a 20-minute break here. We'll come back at 12:40.